On a warm Friday evening, the Grand Oak was alive with the chatter of LA's elite. The recently renovated dining room gleamed under the soft golden lighting, casting a luxurious glow on crystal glasses and polished silverware. Socialites, tech moguls, and celebrities mingled, their laughter rising above the soft melody of the grand piano near the bar. Among the bustle sat an older man in a simple gray polo and casual slacks, his posture relaxed yet composed. He sipped whiskey, his gaze occasionally wandering around the room, taking in the atmosphere, with an amused glint in his eyes. Clint Eastwood had been a silent observer for months, quietly monitoring the restaurant's operations since acquiring it 6 months ago. He believed that the true essence of a restaurant wasn't measured by how it treated VIPs, but by how it welcomed the ordinary customer. He had given his staff strict instructions: treat him like anyone else. The veteran employees recognized him and followed through with his wishes. But the new staff? That was another story. Rachel, a fresh-faced waitress with an ever-growing social media following, had spent the evening ensuring that the city's most followed influencers had everything they needed. She had barely noticed the older man in the corner. But when she did, she saw only what she wanted to see: an underdressed patron who didn't belong in such an upscale establishment. The click of her heels echoed against the floor as she approached Clint's table, her eyes scanning the half-full whiskey glass with mild disdain. "Sir, I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that house whiskey for quite some time," she said, her voice edged with polite condescension. Clint lifted his eyes to meet hers, the same steady gaze that had faced down countless Hollywood executives. "It's a good whiskey," he replied, his tone casual. Rachel's smile was tight, practiced. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bar? We're expecting several reserve parties, and this table is usually for our dining guests." Miguel, a young busboy, overheard the conversation while clearing a nearby table. He tensed, recognizing the man immediately. He had grown up watching Clint Eastwood movies with his father. Miguel clenched his jaw, debating whether to step in. "I'm comfortable here," Clint said simply, taking another sip of his drink. Rachel's patience wavered. She glanced at her watch, then at a group of well-dressed young entrepreneurs waiting near the host stand. "Sir, our executive chef prepares an exclusive menu. The prices reflect the caliber of our establishment." She eyed his casual attire pointedly. A murmur spread through the nearby tables as guests began to take notice. An older couple, longtime patrons of the restaurant, exchanged concerned glances. They knew where this was going, and they knew Rachel was making a grave mistake. A hushed silence fell over the surrounding tables as Rachel's words lingered in the air. The casual murmur of conversation dimmed as more guests began to take notice of the exchange. Miguel shifted uncomfortably, his hands tightening around the tray he was holding. He wanted to intervene, but his position was too low on the restaurant hierarchy. A single mistake could cost him his job. Clint, however, remained calm. He let the moment stretch, his piercing gaze locked onto Rachel's. There was no anger, no defensiveness, only quiet curiosity, as if he were testing the weight of her words in his mind. "Exclusive, you say?" he finally murmured, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Sounds impressive." Rachel took his response as a final opportunity to assert herself. "It is. The chef has trained under some of the finest culinary masters. Our guests expect the best." Clint set his glass down, the sound of it tapping against the table unusually loud in the expectant quiet. He leaned forward slightly, his voice still as steady as ever. "And what makes you think I don't expect the best?" Rachel hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her perfectly curated demeanor. "Well, sir, Before she could stumble over an excuse, a deep voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem here?" The restaurant's general manager, Thomas Reynolds, had been watching from the bar. A seasoned professional with over 20 years in the industry, he knew trouble when he saw it. And right now, Rachel was standing knee-deep in it. Rachel turned to him, eager to explain. "Mr. Reynolds, I was just ensuring that our priority guests have the best experience. This gentleman," she gestured toward Clint, "has been sitting here for quite some time with only a drink." Thomas inhaled sharply, resisting the urge to rub his temples. He had trained Rachel personally, but clearly she had not absorbed one of his most important lessons: never judge a guest based on appearances. And now she had unknowingly disrespected the owner of the establishment. Miguel, sensing an opportunity, finally stepped forward. "Sir," he addressed Clint respectfully, "would you like me to bring the menu?" Clint smiled at the young busboy, appreciating his tact. "That'd be nice, kid." Rachel blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift in tone. "Mr. Reynolds, Thomas raised a hand, silencing her. "Rachel, step into my office after your shift." Understanding dawned on her face. She had made a mistake. A big one. Meanwhile, Clint picked up his glass, offering Miguel an approving nod. "Good instinct," he said before taking another sip. The restaurant buzzed again, but now the murmurs were about the lesson learned that evening. A lesson Rachel wouldn't soon forget. Rachel's heart pounded as she stepped into Thomas Reynolds' office after her shift. The small room was lined with shelves filled with wine bottles and old menus, a subtle reminder of the restaurant's legacy. Thomas sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled as he regarded her with disappointment. "Rachel, do you have any idea who that man was?" Thomas asked, his voice measured but firm. She swallowed hard, still not entirely sure what she had done wrong. "A regular customer," she ventured. Thomas sighed. "That man is Clint Eastwood. He owns this place." Rachel's eyes widened in shock, the color draining from her face. "What?" Thomas nodded. "He bought Grand Oak 6 months ago, and you, Rachel, just insulted him." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. The judgmental glances, the dismissive tone. She had treated him like an unimportant patron when, in reality, he was the most important one of all. Meanwhile, out on the restaurant floor, Clint called Miguel over. "Kid, what's your name?" "Miguel, sir." "Well, Miguel, you've got a good eye. Keep it up." Miguel grinned, pride swelling in his chest. As for Rachel, she learned a lesson that night, one she wouldn't forget anytime soon. Rachel sat frozen in the chair across from Thomas, her mind racing as she replayed every word she had said to Clint Eastwood. The weight of her mistake settled heavily on her shoulders. I didn't recognize him," she admitted weakly. "That's the point," Thomas said. "You judged him based on his clothes, his drink choice, everything but the one thing that matters, how we treat our guests." Rachel lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I was trying to make sure our VIP guests had a good experience." Thomas let out a deep sigh. "And in doing so, you humiliated the owner of this restaurant." "Rachel, this industry isn't just about food, it's about respect. And tonight, you disrespected the very man who signs your paychecks." Silence filled the office. Rachel clenched her hands together, searching for the right words. "Am I fired?" she asked hesitantly. Thomas studied her for a long moment before shaking his head. "Number. But you are on probation, and you will personally apologize to Mr. Eastwood the next time he visits." Rachel nodded quickly, relief washing over her. "I understand. I'll do better." "I hope so," Thomas said, "because one more mistake like this, and you won't have another chance." As Rachel left the office, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Embarrassment, regret, and determination clashed within her. She knew she had to prove herself, not just to Thomas, but to Clint Eastwood himself. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into her work with newfound humility. She greeted every guest warmly, regardless of their attire or how much they spent. She took extra care in understanding the restaurant's history, its values, and, most importantly, the people who walked through its doors. Then one evening, Clint Eastwood returned. Rachel spotted him the moment he stepped inside. This time there was no hesitation. She walked over to his table, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Mr. Eastwood, may I take your order?" Clint looked up at her, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a moment before nodding. "I'll have the special." Rachel smiled, feeling a sense of redemption in that simple exchange. "Coming right up, sir." And with that, she had taken her first step toward earning back the respect she had lost. The silence that had engulfed the restaurant slowly began to fade as whispers spread among the patrons. Rachel, still standing stiffly, her order pad hanging limply at her side, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her like an invisible force. She had made a terrible mistake, one that could have cost her everything. And yet, instead of humiliating her or sending her out in disgrace, Clint Eastwood had given her a choice. For a moment she hesitated, The arrogance that had fueled her behavior only minutes ago still clung to the edges of her pride, urging her to walk out with her head high, pretending she was the one making the decision. But deep inside, she knew that wouldn't be true. Leaving now would only mean running away from her own failure, from the reality that she had misjudged not just a customer, but a legend, a man who had built his name on principles she had completely ignored. She glanced over at Miguel, the young busboy she had dismissed so easily. He was standing taller now, eyes still filled with disbelief, his hands gripping the edge of his apron as if grounding himself in reality. He had been offered an opportunity most would dream of, and he had earned it through nothing but his humility and quiet respect. Could she say the same for herself? Rachel took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet Clint's steady gaze. I'd like to stay and learn, sir, if you'll let me. A ghost of a smile played at the corner of Clint's mouth as he nodded. Good choice. Thomas, the manager, finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding and stepped forward, clapping a firm hand on Miguel's shoulder. All right then, Miguel, looks like you're getting a promotion. And Rachel, you'll be learning from the best. The tension in the restaurant began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet murmur of approval. The older couple at the next table, who had been watching the entire exchange with interest, were the first to applaud. Their slow, deliberate claps echoed through the room, and soon others joined in. Not for the celebrity sitting among them, but for the lesson they had all just witnessed. A reminder that true class was never about money, status, or appearances. It was about how people treated each other. Rachel wiped at her eyes quickly, embarrassed but determined. She knew she had a long way to go to prove herself. Miguel, still slightly in shock, smiled hesitantly as Thomas guided them both toward the staff area, where their new roles would begin. Clint watched them go before taking another sip of his whiskey, the familiar warmth settling in his chest. He had come to the Grand Oak every Friday for 6 months, sitting in the same seat, watching, waiting. Not for moments like these, but for the assurance that the old values, the ones that had built places like this, still had a place in a world obsessed with luxury and status. Tonight had proven that, at least for now, they did. Jerry, the longtime accountant, leaned in slightly. You handled that well, sir, Clint shrugged. Just another day. A few moments later, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. Dishes clinked, low conversations filled the air, and servers moved smoothly through the space. But something had shifted. The air was lighter, more genuine. The regulars could feel it. The Grand Oak wasn't just a high-end restaurant. It was a place where dignity and respect still mattered. And if you stopped by on a Friday evening, you might just see a man in a casual polo shirt sitting at his usual corner table, sipping whiskey, quietly ensuring that those values lived on.